When a homeless man approached Barron Trump, asking for just $1, no one expected what would happen next. The bustling streets of Cleveland, Ohio, were alive with the chaos of everyday life. Honking cars, the shuffle of hurried pedestrians, and the chatter of people moving from one place to another. But in the midst of this frenzied cityscape, there was a moment that would change everything. On the corner of Broad Street and 17th Avenue, there was a man, Leonard, sitting against the cold stone of an old convenience store. His clothes were a mismatched array of worn-out layers, unable to protect him from the biting winter chill. Beside him was a cardboard sign that simply read, "Anything helps. God bless." Leonard's life hadn't always been this way. At 42, he had once been a hard-working man, but a series of bad breaks had pushed him to the edge. A factory closure, followed by a sudden illness, had cost him his job and home. For the past year, he'd been living on the streets, just trying to survive each day. As the crowd bustled around him, Leonard could feel the isolation that had settled into his soul. Sometimes people would toss coins his way, but most hurried by, avoiding his gaze as if he were invisible. But on this day, something was different. A figure caught his eye. A pair of pristine white sneakers stopped just a few feet away. Leonard squinted up, trying to make sense of the figure standing before him. It wasn't just any person. The teenager had an air about him, wealth, youth, confidence. He was scrolling through his phone, seemingly unaware of the homeless man beside him. Leonard had learned not to approach anyone unless they looked at him first. But something about this boy intrigued him. There was no rush in his steps, no distraction in his demeanor. So, gathering what little courage he had left, Leonard spoke up. "Hey, young man," Leonard called out, his voice cracking from the cold. "Can you spare $1?" The boy froze, his head turning slowly as he took in the scene. For a moment, the world seemed to pause around them. The boy didn't move immediately. Instead, he took a few seconds to process the question before responding in a calm, almost measured voice. "What do you need it for?" he asked, his gaze steady. Leonard blinked, taken aback by the question. It wasn't a typical dismissive no or a quick glance away. This was a genuine inquiry, one that made Leonard feel seen for the first time in a long while. "Maybe just a coffee. A sandwich, if I'm lucky," Leonard mumbled, his words faltering under the boy's gaze. The boy stepped closer, his phone now safely tucked into his pocket. His presence was calm, unhurried, and Leonard felt an odd mix of unease and curiosity as the crowd around them whispered, pulling out phones to snap pictures. The boy crouched down to meet Leonard's eyes at his level, a move that startled Leonard. He had never been treated this way before. Most people would look away in discomfort or toss some loose change. But this boy, he wasn't looking down on Leonard. He was looking at him, really looking. "What's your name?" the boy asked softly. "Leonard," came the reply. "I'm Barron," the boy said, his tone free of any arrogance, just simple and straightforward. For a moment, it felt as though the noise of the city had faded. The chaotic hum of the streets, the honking horns, the footsteps, all of it seemed distant as Leonard held Barron's gaze. "How long have you been out here?" Barron asked, his voice gentle but direct. Leonard hesitated. This wasn't something he often talked about. People didn't care about the reasons behind his circumstances. They just cared about the spectacle. But Barron's question felt different. It was real. It was curious, not judgmental. "About a year now," Leonard replied. "Lost my job when the plant shut down. Then my health got worse. Couldn't keep up with the rent. It's been a downhill ride since." Barron didn't react with pity. He just listened, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were piecing something together in his mind. But then, without a word, he reached into his pocket. Leonard's heart skipped a beat. He had only asked for $1, but Barron wasn't reaching for loose change. When Barron's hand emerged, it wasn't with a few coins. It was a crisp, fresh $100 bill. Leonard stared in disbelief. He had asked for so little, yet here was someone offering him something that could change everything. For a moment, Leonard couldn't move, stunned by the sheer generosity of the gesture. Here, Barron said, extending the bill toward Leonard. This should cover more than just coffee. Are you serious? Leonard asked, his voice shaky. Why would you do that? Barron shrugged, a nonchalant but sincere smile on his face. Because I can, he replied simply. Leonard felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't been expecting this. It wasn't just the money. It was the act itself. The kindness, the acknowledgement. For the first time in a long time, Leonard didn't feel invisible. Barron leaned in slightly, his voice softening. But listen, he said, this isn't just about the money. I want you to promise me something. Leonard looked up, confused. What? Barron's gaze was steady. If I help you today, you have to promise me that you'll help yourself tomorrow. Deal? Leonard swallowed hard, the weight of Barron's words sinking in. For the first time in years, someone was giving him a lifeline and challenging him to pull himself up. The promise wasn't just a handout. It was a demand for action. Deal, Leonard said, his voice quieter than usual. Barron smiled and stood up, brushing off his pants. As he turned to leave, he reached into his pocket again, pulling out a small notepad and pen. Scribbling something quickly, he handed the paper to Leonard. Go to this address tomorrow morning. Tell them I sent you, Barron said. Leonard looked down at the note, his fingers trembling. It was the address of a local shelter, one that had been helping people like him get back on their feet. But Leonard had never thought to visit. Pride, fear, and shame had always kept him away. I'll make sure they're expecting you, Barron added. The brief exchange had changed something inside Leonard. There was hope now. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could turn around. The next morning, Leonard stood outside the Hope Outreach Resource Center, the address Barron had given him. The building was modest, tucked away on a quiet side street. Inside, it was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold, indifferent city outside. The receptionist looked up, smiled warmly, and said, You must be Leonard. We've been expecting you. The following hours passed in a blur. Leonard met with a caseworker who helped him map out a plan to get back on his feet. He was set up with temporary shelter, a doctor's appointment for his health, and even enrolled in a job training program. It was overwhelming, but it was also the first time in a long while that Leonard had felt like he could do this. That change was possible. Meanwhile, Barron's small act of kindness had exploded on social media. A video taken by a bystander showed the two of them talking, and it went viral overnight. It was the kind of thing that rarely happened in the world. A privileged young man offering real help to someone in need. The debate raged online. Was it a publicity stunt, or was it genuine kindness? It didn't matter. The ripple effect was undeniable. People all over the country began stepping up, sharing their own stories of kindness and paying it forward. The Hope Outreach Resource Center received an outpouring of support, donations, and volunteers. Leonard didn't know that his story had become a national sensation. He was too focused on his own journey, the steps he needed to take to reclaim his life. Then, something even more unexpected happened. One day, as Leonard sat in the shelter's common room, a man approached him. It was his brother, Paul, the one he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The two men stared at each other, the years of estrangement hanging heavy in the air. But Paul didn't walk away. He sat down, put his hand on Leonard's shoulder, and said, I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. For Leonard, this was the most profound moment of all. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he no longer felt alone. He had a chance to rebuild, to restore what had been lost. And so, Leonard's journey continued. It wasn't just the money or the shelter that mattered. It was the kindness, the challenge to rise, and the realization that no one was truly beyond help. He had been given a second chance, an opportunity to change, not just for himself, but for the people around him. The story that began with a simple dollar would echo far beyond that street corner. It would inspire a movement, reunite a family, and show the world that even in the darkest times, hope could still shine through.